Most people want to have a nice house, a nice car, and take care of their family. There are a lot of ways to make this money in the world. You can work a good job, invest your money, borrow your mom's credit card, or steal $200 million from hundreds of investors. Clayton Smith chose the latter, and it led to a successful yoga studio, beautiful houses, and the creation of The Joker, one of the biggest movies ever. And this all came out of one of the biggest Ponzi schemes to ever come out of Canada. Clayton, a 17-year-old kid that wants a lot in life, so he enrolls into a prestigious military college. He does great, graduates, and even becomes captain of the infantry for 5 years. He was on the pathway to a very comfortable life. However, just comfort would never have been enough for Clayton, starving for more, to live the life of luxury. Ambitiously, he joined the financial world and gained his certificate to consult clients. This newly gained knowledge allowed him to open up Crystal Wealth Management in 1998. This was his hedge fund that he worked his life to achieve. Now, the only direction for Clayton was up. First, he just had to find some clients that wanted to invest with him. How does a newbie gain the trust of wealthy people to invest their money? By making them more money, of course. People get blinded by their emotions and it leads to irrational decisions. This was Clayton's theory when it came to trading stocks. He said there was waves when stocks would rise and fall, while emotions blinded people from selling and buying optimally. So he asked himself, what would happen if we could harness these waves by getting on early in the rise and get off early in the fall? Or as most people say now, buy low and sell high. Really easy, huh? He coined this theory as the crystal system. Clay told his investors that he started to use his own money for this whole system. Using the same system, Clay claimed that he went all the way back to the 1940s and the system worked perfect. After creating his snake oil, he ironically approached some investors and used their emotion of greed to sell them on the emotionless system. After a few private investors, it branched out, and by 2006, Clayton was managing well over $3 million. He believed this was a good start, but that's all it was, just a start for him. Ambition and greed overlapped in Clayton's mind, and it drove him to grow tired of the slow money, and he wanted to live it up. With time, he slowly learned more of the financial system. By 2010, he was not just the CEO of Crystal Wealth Management, he was doing so much more. So it gets a bit complicated from here, so bear with me. He was in charge of 4 separate business entities: CLJ Everest, 11 Limited, and Chrysalis Yoga. 4th one being Crystal Wealth Management, the hedge fund, or CWM. Between Everest and 115 Limited, they owned 92% of the shares of CWM. These two entities in reality were just shell companies for Clay. There was no legitimate business being done here, although they did sometimes claim to be a consulting company for Crystal Wealth. On the other hand, the yoga studio was an authentic studio. His wife would run it and be the face, while he handled the books and instructed yoga sometimes. Things were looking good for Clay. His hedge fund was expanding rapidly. To raise more capital, he added more funds that were just subsidiaries that focus on different markets. Originally, it started with a mortgage fund, then it continued to a medical fund, and so on. By the end, there were over 10 funds. I don't want to bore you with all the boring details, but there was a very important one: the media fund. This fund held the majority of the money from CWM, but unlike most other funds, this one was run by a separate company named Media House, which was run by our second antagonist of the story, Aaron Gilbert. In reality, Clay and Aaron were not as separate as it appeared from the outside. They worked together very closely and allowed Aaron to build a company we now know as Braun, also known as the company behind the Joker. For this story, Media House and Braun are about the same things. The names are pretty interchangeable, so I will be doing that from here on out. Clay and Aaron were a greedy match made in heaven. They were going to make money and it did not matter who got in their way. So how did Braun play into all of this? Braun was used to procure movies for the media fund to invest to, as Aaron was supposed to be an expert in producing movies. This sort of happened, but all the movies Aaron was asking loans for were movies he was producing. This led to Aaron writing a check to his own company and then using that investor money to create his films. The thing is that the money these loans were being created from were from investors who were none the wiser. Investors were allowed to pick which fund they put their money into, so they could manage their risk tolerance. However, no matter what fund they chose, Clay would divert most of that money into the media fund anyways. This made the media fund by far the fund with the most money on hand, sitting at around $40 million at the time. This all sounds great for Aaron. He gets to make movies using other people's money, but why was Clay willing to risk all his clients' money and reputation for him? It turns out that when the media fund would loan money out to Aaron's company, there were a few strings attached. 10% of the loan would be paid in a fee to different companies. Remember those shell companies Clay made earlier? Well, he's finally going to cash in on them. He would have Braun send over hundreds of thousands of dollars to each of those entities. In 2012, there was a loan for about $10 million. Out of that 10, 5 ended up in Clay's pockets, either through the yoga studio or one of the other shell companies. At this point, Clay was feeling really confident and even had Aaron send his personal TD bank account $330,000 to buy a new house. Clay was finally living the high life. He had millions in his account, and the people he was scamming was consistent and easy. On the outside, these movies were doing great numbers, and his ideas to alternate investing, hand in hand with the traditional ideas, looked great. There was a slight problem though. When money starts coming, the people who really care about it is your government. They want to be paid too. 2013 is here, and here comes the established auditor BDO knocking on Clay's door. Clay is panicked, but he has to do what he always does: lie. See, this whole time he was inflating numbers in all of the different funds. He was mixing money for all of them and sometimes not even writing down $1 million deals. The walls were starting to close in on the business until he sent a desperation email to Aaron. Here, he sends a spreadsheet on some of this year's movies. Aaron takes a look and notices the numbers are way higher than what he had. He obliges and inflates the numbers to match exactly what Clay had. He sends it to BDO. Moments later, Clay does the same. He also emailed another cohort to check out the documents before the auditors did to make sure there was nothing suspicious. Clay implemented a lot of the classic tricks of moving sales from one year to another. They also would have money in one fund and move it to another to make them both look plentiful. BDO has been around since the 60s and has been auditing Canadian companies longer than Clay has been alive. BDO reports back at the end of the day. Nothing. They pass. Clay has finally done it. He's won. Under him, there was around $100 million, he had an audit company in his pocket, and no sign of stopping. There was one question though: why was BDO so bad at catching this? BDO is a respected name in the industry, but they put a lot of trust in Braun's so-called objective opinion on the movie payments and future sales. BDO was unaware of how close these two companies really were on the inside. Regardless, this led Clay to be the man he always wanted to be. Sitting on top of the throne, there was nothing that could stop him. For 3 years, Clay and Aaron would get past these audits, and led to some of the biggest gains they have ever seen. Clay was buying new houses, finally buying some fancy cars, and even supporting his wife's yoga studio. At this point, Crystal Wealth was not losing too much of the investor money. Besides what Clay and Aaron were pocketing, the fund was relatively healthy. The stock market was recovering, and investors were coming in more than pulling out. Aaron even learned how to make some money on some of the movies he would produce, but the ruse could only last for so long. Finally, it's 2016 and Clay is in disbelief with the abysmal numbers this year's movies are doing. Sorry, Aaron isn't really good at being consistent. I'm sure that won't happen again though. Anyways, Clay is upset, so he sends this over to Aaron in an email and talks about having to move some of the numbers around. Of course, Aaron obliges and he switches these numbers for him, but this was a lot this time. This was over $10 million that they were switching. No one would believe it, and the audit season was right around the corner. As a certified hedge fund, Crystal Wealth had to produce a financial audit for this year. Of course, it was BDO again. They came in and started their audit. They noticed the discrepancy in the movie profits very quickly. After bringing this up to Clay, he did not allow BDO to complete their audit. Crystal Wealth never did provide their financial audit for that year, which led to a plethora of lawsuits instead exposing this whole scheme in detail. During this lawsuit, it was found out Clay was a very incompetent fund manager. By the end, he had almost no money to himself at all. He was basically just using these funds as bank accounts so they could be seized. Funny enough, the yoga studio, which was the only real business, was the last one standing. Even this did not last long. After the courts found out the amount of money siphoned over there, officially closing in 2021. The receivers who were suing got money back from the studio, Clay's shell companies, and a lot of the Crystal Wealth funds. There was speculation whether Aaron's Braun would have to forfeit funds as well. And what seems to be a change of heart, Braun would end up buying the media fund from Clay for $14 million to give back to the victims, showing a recovery of $100 million of the $200 million that Clay controlled. This was unheard of for most Ponzi schemes. Finally, after almost 20 years, one of the biggest Ponzi schemes in Canadian history has fallen. Clay was finally going to face repercussions for his actions in court. Madoff stole over $60 billion and received 150 years behind bars, so what would Clay get? After admitting to wrongdoing, Clay was made an example of, receiving 10 years behind bars. Just kidding, this is Canada, where everything is nicer. I mean everything. He received a slap on the wrist and was ordered to pay $300,000 and was told not to participate in trading securities. So if you want to start a Ponzi scheme, let's do Canada. Since the end of the lawsuit, There was not much word from Clay. All we know is that he has not paid the $300,000 fine, but he has not appeared in the public since. That was the end of Clay, but where one falls another must rise. Aaron Gilbert made a fuck ton of dollars in the scheme of Clay, and would even loan him millions of dollars when asked. After buying the media fund, he gained the good graces of the court and was not subject to anything. But logically speaking, he stole money from these people and he used the same money to pay them back while pocketing millions for the trouble. Before this point, Braun was the heart of the Ponzi scheme and Aaron did not face any consequences for his actions. But with no more free money coming in from Uncle Clay, Braun had to evolve. Aaron wanted to separate himself from the scheme, so he rebranded Braun Studios to Braun Media. Really creative, guys. After rebranding to Braun Media, they partnered with Creative Wealth Media. This all sounds pretty familiar at this point, another company with the acronym CWM. But this one was not being run by Aaron as well. However, some of Braun's directors were in charge, so there were still very close ties. Together they produced some of their biggest films, signing a $100 million deal with Warner Bros. To produce movies, including The Joker. This quickly became one of the biggest movies ever, making over $1 billion in the box office, making Braun into a household name of producers. Now it was Aaron's turn to be the man Clay always wished to be, making money, clean, and living a luxurious life. A man who defrauded so many people before him stands on top like it never happened. But no one ever said life was fair, until a bombshell reports dropped saying that Braun was losing a lot of money on these movies, such as Ghostbusters made a good bit in the box office, but significantly less than what investors projected. Besides that, COVID struck them hard. No one was going out to the movies anymore, and these theaters were completely empty. Braun Media had to lay off employees and started to pivot away from movies, claiming that TV shows were the future. But this did not last long. After only a few months of the plan, Braun pivoted to the digital market. While at the same time, a different lawsuit comes in, an investing company is claiming that Braun had not paid them $14 million for movies in the past 2 years. Grasping on straws, Aaron's company had to adapt, and quickly. After scrolling Twitter for a few hours, he found out about blockchain tech and how much money was flowing in. Braun quickly announced that they were launching a game called Gossamer, and an NFT was set with it. These NFTs could be used in the game. It was a quick way for him to make some money without really having to launch anything significant. They would need this for the legal battles coming ahead. The company suing was named Hudson, and they claimed that Braun and his partner organization CWM committed wire fraud, misleaded contracts, and even hit them with RICO charges. Hudson made the case that the studios promised to pay them back with certain interest no matter how the movies performed. They did a lot of insurances that they couldn't insure. Hudson was filled with lies to get into their wallet, and it really worked. Later on, Hudson even found out that Braun got a completely different company to finance the same movie as them, double dipping on the loan. Braun did not pay either of these companies, with the other one also seeking litigation towards them. Braun did not disclose this to Hudson, and although they were making some money on their movies, they were over-promising to these investors. It was over $20 million in debt, not even including these lawsuits. Aaron has had immense luck during these past 13 years, and it isn't fading yet. The lawsuit got dismissed by the courts due to Braun not having sufficient connections to the United States. This is where Hudson filed it and where they were located. One more break for Braun and Aaron. So let's take a look at Gossamer, the game they've been working on for the past year. There was no game. And honestly, I'm not sure if there ever was one. The closest they got was making resources and adding a game into creative Fortnite. After selling out various sets of NFTs for hundreds of dollars each, the best they could do was something your little brother does for fun on a Friday. And it was reported and seen here that the team behind Gossamer was going to a bunch of fancy conferences and flexing their wealth. I don't want to take CoffeeZilla's next video, but it just seemed like a long-term rug pull. Braun took money from their followers and investors and delivered nothing of value. Just like his mentor Clay before him, Aaron's house of cards were falling down for good. It was time to hang it up and cut their losses. This came to reality when Braun filed for bankruptcy in July of 2023. For me, this journey and my research started after seeing the production company behind the Joker went bankrupt. Braun's statement blamed almost all of it right on COVID, but I feel like there had to have been more. After digging and finding some lawsuits, I dug even more. Underneath it, there was just so much. I felt like it was important that everybody knows how a company could practice dirty money since inception and come out as a good guy to the public. Also beware, Creative Wealth Media, the company partnered with Braun by the end, is still around and seems to run in very similar patterns to Braun. So be vigilant, be careful, and if it's too good to be true, it probably is. This whole scheme seems to not have been reported on much, as most of my information was from legal documents and the Wayback Machine. I had to make it more concise to paint easier in photo. I will leave all my sources in the description if you want to check it out. If you have any questions, please leave a comment. My brain is kind of filled with this stuff right now. Subscribe if you enjoy, like if you like, dislike if you dislike. Peace out.